Now back to the show. This is AM 650's The Law Show.
Our guests in studio for this episode of The Law Show are from Murphy Batista, LLP, a personal injury firm in downtown Vancouver at 650 West Georgia and online at murphybatista.com. Joel Murphy, QC, is one of the partners, and Angela Price-Stevens is a lawyer who works a lot in medical malpractice. Angela, we Canadians, we're an awfully polite bunch, you know. I think we inherited that from you Brits a couple of hundred years ago, but we have this sort of sensibility about us that, you know, one does not sue a doctor. They're good people. They do good work. And besides, they have these lawyers, and it's almost impossible to sue a doctor in Canada. We're most reluctant to do so, aren't we?
Generally speaking, yes, we are, and it's not something that I wish to generally upset people and suggest the doctors, you know, should be sued left, right, and centre. Absolutely not. But there are circumstances where doctors, you know, a bad mistake has been made. But yeah, most of the potential clients come to me with this a huge weight on their shoulders, telling me about what's happened to them, and then they'll turn around and say, "But I know it's practically impossible to sue these doctors." Mm-hmm. So that's the prevailing feeling out there.
Unlike Joe, our friends south of the line, where everybody sues everybody, and it's just a bit of a Wild West gong show when it comes to medical malpractice. We're kind of the opposite end of that pendulum swing, aren't we?
Well, we are, but the medical malpractice litigation in the States is wildly exaggerated by the insurance industry. 1 in 8 medical malpractice trials in the States is successful. So 7 of 8 of those cases are lost.
Interesting.
So the idea that there's this lottery going on in the States is really developed by the insurance industry because they want people to think it's difficult to sue a doctor. They want the doctors to understand why the premiums are so high. And you've got the insurance industry that's a really big part of that system in the States.
Yes.
That generally has huge profits that come out of it, whereas the CMPA in Canada runs at a break-even basis. It's not there to make money. It's there to provide protection.
And the CMPA is the Canadian Medical Protective Association. This is the legal defense unit for the doctors of the country, Angela.
That's right, yes.
Now, so when people tell you it's almost impossible to sue a doctor, what do you say?
Well, you know, it depends on the context, but generally I'm there to educate, and I'll say it's not easy.
Right.
It's not easy.
Shouldn't be.
No, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that it should be just easy to sue a doctor. But I'll say to them, listen, this is what I do for a living. So I fully accept and understand and appreciate the context in which I'm working. Mm-hmm. So when you think it's difficult, yes, I'm acknowledging it's not easy.
Right.
But that in itself is not going to deter me. What it does is it starts the process of me evaluating the claim, that's listening to the client, gathering the key documents, again evaluating, and you go at something systematically and carefully and economically because I'm there to help the client, not make it more difficult for them. Yes.
Sure, right. Now, Joe, we're not here to denigrate the medical profession by any stretch of the imagination, but Angela referred to repeat offenders a couple of segments ago. I would assume that we're talking about a very small percentage of the medical community, but are there repeat offenders, and why are they allowed to repeat?
Well, Sterling, fortunately, there's just a few doctors in British Columbia that are often sued. They're called frequent flyers. And there's one in particular. There was an article in the Vancouver Sun 10 or 15 years ago that documented at that time 28 lawsuits against this doctor. I've sued this doctor. I know that he's cavalier in the way he considers his patients, and he's cavalier in the way he looks at lawsuits. But there's been attempts to say to the College of Physicians and Surgeons, you should pull his license. That's been unsuccessful. And there's been attempts to go to hospitals that this doctor works out of and says you shouldn't have him on staff, and those have been unsuccessful. So for the person that walks into a doctor's office or into the ER and is seen by one of these few, and there's just a few. It's a handful.
I know, and I
less
appreciate
than
that.
the fingers on my one hand.
Right, and that needs to be reinforced. But it does happen.
But they don't know, and I know I will meet with a new client sometimes and say, well, who's you're treating this specialist? They'll say, it's Dr. So-and-so, and I'll say, I don't think anymore, because I just know from experience, as I say, how cavalier that doctor in particular is about his patients and how cavalier he is about lawsuits. But we're talking about just a very, very few doctors.
Right. And when, Angela, when a doctor loses in one of your cases and you're successful with your client and you recover some damages, what effect, if any, does that have on the doctor who just lost the suit?
Well, there are two classes of situations to consider. One, which is the vast majority of my cases, which is quite frustrating at times, though that class of cases where you settle on the courtroom step.
Right,
so it will settle, say, Thursday or Friday before a trial is due to commence Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And any form of settlement without a judgment, there is going to be a confidentiality clause, which is part of the backbone of the agreement with the CMPA, whereby my client is prohibited from, the words of the agreement is that they're not even allowed to say that they've had a settlement, which is, slightly nonsense.
Right.
But the idea is that it's a watertight confidentiality clause where the existence and the content and the amount of the settlement cannot be discussed.
Okay.
And then the second case is those that go through trial.
And then you see those in the paper.
And you'll see the judgments, or the fact that there's been a trial and the judgment, that will be in the paper.
Sure.
But for the doctors who settle confidentially, realistically, nothing really happens.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing happens. It's all hushed up, and their lives are not affected because we've already heard the premiums do not go up for them. The college stands behind, the CMPA stands behind them.
Right.
Now, those that do end up with a judgment against them, from my experience, they do carry on practicing. So they carry on practicing. I'm not suggesting for one moment that on a human level that they're not suffering in some way, but financially, no, they don't suffer. And they carry on. So, and this is something which, affects me personally, some emotional level because of where I've come from.
Sure.
And the whole lack of accountability. Because when I worked in the UK doing both National Health Service litigation and albeit defense, and the private doctor's defense work, there was some accountability. So at the end of my case, at the end of the legal case, I was asked to put a report together that would go to the health authority, putting my opinion together, my perspective as a lawyer as to what went wrong. And
Right.
then over the months, I would see that the changes were made. That's the major piece that's missing for me here in Canada.
Right. They're sort of invincible almost, Joe, in terms of reputation, because if you've described having sued one particular doctor and he's still practicing. So, life goes on, wheels keep turning, a few bucks get pushed around here and there, and no harm, no foul.
Well, Sterling, what I really emphasize to clients before they begin the process of making a claim is that a lawsuit doesn't involve the doctor. His name is on the papers, but it's the person making the injury claim whose medical records are disclosed,
Right.
who's examined by a variety of doctors hired by the defense,
True.
whose financial records have to be disclosed, whose whole life is opened up, because to understand the claim, you've got to look at everything.
Of course.
None of that happens with the doctor.
Right.
So it's not the doctor who's harmed by a lawsuit. It's the privacy of the person making the claim that's essentially lost during the lawsuit.
Right.
And people need to understand that.
Well, we've certainly covered a fair bit of ground on this episode of The Law Show. Thanks to both of you for coming in. I should let you know that MurphyBatista.com is the website, and all the contact points for Angela or for Joe Murphy or any of the other members of the firm are at MurphyBatista.com. They're downtown at 650 West Georgia in the Scotiabank Tower, right there at Georgia in Granville. Thanks, both of you, Angela and Joe, for coming in. A terrific show and very, very informative. Much appreciated.